Dear Killer, Part 1, A Deadly Waltz of Love and Betrayal, written by Sedef Keskin. Chapter 1, Love at First Fight. You're driving me insane. The fingers gripping my throat cut off my breath, but they quickly loosened because he loved hearing my screams. His sweat-drenched chest pressed fully against my back, one hand around my neck and the other clutching my thighs. The walls, along with me, echoed with my screams, the sound of our bodies colliding, and the creaking of a bed on the verge of breaking. Behind me, a businessman on the brink of tears from pleasure, and at the hotel room door, two massive bodyguards aroused by my moans, which meant that tonight, in this hotel room, I was the only one not enjoying myself. With one final thrust, Stefano Rossi pinned me to the bed and wrapped his arm around my neck. His hot, rapid breaths invaded my ear, and I continued to scream. As if the faster the rhythm, the more pleasure I felt, as if the harder he slammed into my hips, the closer I was to climax. Of course, in that moment, I was as far from pleasure as one could be, and he didn't care. That was the kind of man Rossi was, a fool who thought he was a god of sex. In reality, he was just another man who knew nothing about a woman's body or cared to learn, and God, there were so many of them. Finally, Rossi collapsed onto my back. As I felt the slick warmth inside me, he struggled to catch his breath. At last, he rolled to the side, his disgusting body releasing my skin. I sat up in bed, grabbed my nightgown from the floor, and slipped it over me. "I want to marry you, Rosa," Rossi panted. With my back to him, I stared at the ceiling. "You're already married, Stefano," I murmured. "Yes, but she's not like you. She doesn't understand my work. She doesn't understand me." His arms wrapped tightly around my waist from behind, pulling me close. He lowered the strap of my nightgown and let his lips trail over my skin. "She doesn't believe in the good I do," he whispered, his breath sending creepy chills down my spine. I frowned. "What makes you think I believe?" I felt his lips curve into a smile against my skin. "If you didn't believe, Bella, you wouldn't be here," he said with a playful chuckle, his lips reaching my neck. Soon I felt his teeth graze my skin. "Unless, of course, you're only here for my money." The voice in my head growled, "I'm here for your life." I sighed, pulling away from him and standing up. Where was that message? I was tired of wasting time with this man, and if I had to let him inside me one more time, I might shoot myself instead of him. "I'm not sure what stealing has to do with being a good man, Stefano," I muttered. "Not you too," he groaned. I glanced at him as he flopped back onto the bed, his eyes glaring at me. "If only you knew who I steal from. And what about the good things I've done? Don't you remember the well I funded in Africa? Or the fund I created for children with cancer?" I shrugged. He continued, "I don't see a problem taking from the bad to give to the good, Bella." He thought of himself as some kind of saint, but I knew the truth. I had read the reports in detail. That well in Africa was just a cover for his dirty dealings there. The fund for children with cancer, a scheme to launder money from his drug trade. Men like Rossi had a warped sense of goodness. For them, charity and the needy were just camouflage for their crimes. These men needed to be eradicated, and the organization I worked for, the Kurulush, made that possible. This was my job, and I would continue doing it until scum like Rossi were wiped out, or until I got my revenge. And I was excellent at my job. There was no one better. Once I had my target in my sights, I wouldn't stop until I got what I wanted, and I never let them escape. There was only one exception so far, but just because I hadn't killed him yet didn't mean he had escaped me. 3 months ago. His eyes were darker than the night, staring at me as if he could see through my eyes and into my soul. The wall behind me barely kept me grounded in reality. My fingers gripped his dark hair as if searching for something to anchor me while his tongue drew screams from me. At that moment, my world couldn't have been further from reality. My body trembled, my voice filled the room, and the more I moaned, the more his tongue owned me. Josh Rendall was one of the rare men who truly understood a woman's body. After a violent shudder, my legs gave out. He noticed immediately. Standing up, he caught me by the waist, pinning me between him and the wall. My legs were useless, and he held me upright. He gave me a moment to catch my breath. Our chests moved together in a rhythmic dance, and I wrapped my arm around his neck, still leaning on him for support. "I have a surprise for you," he whispered. He carefully set me down and turned away. I should have focused on the mission. The message had already arrived, but my body refused to leave this man without one last goodbye. I wished we had more time. I had spent a month with him, trying to learn everything I could, yet all I had learned was nothing. I had infiltrated his life for no reason. But I could say this: he was the best mission I'd ever had. Not because he provided any useful information for the Kurulush, but because of what I had learned about myself. Like how a man could make me reach intense orgasms with just his tongue. As he walked towards the nightstand, I took my gun from my bag. I couldn't help but feel sorry. Because if we had more time, I would have loved to get to know myself better with him. While hiding the gun behind me and attaching the silencer, he took something from the nightstand that I couldn't see and hid it behind him. With a seductive smile on his lips, he came closer to me. When he stood in front of me, the way he looked at me made me want to ignore the message that had just popped up on my phone. The smile on his lips was so penetrating to my soul that I kept reminding myself this was just a mission. But he was turning my head in such a way that I wanted to forget my task. He knelt down in front of me. While I found it strange, it worked in my favor. I turned off the safety on my gun behind me. He then extended a small velvet box towards me. No way. Who proposes after a month? It was true that I was taken aback, but when he opened the box, I stared at the ring that dazzled my eyes for a long time, and the possibilities that diamond brought made my head spin. A warm home, a man who would vow to love me in sickness and in health, maybe even little children I would love unconditionally. Of course, that was a fantasy. A happy marriage was a myth, a rare occurrence for a lucky few. And someone like me wasn't meant for that kind of luck. I could kill him just for making me dream of such things. Josh dropped to one knee, his eyes shining with hope. "Will you marry me?" Before I could think, my mission instincts took over. I raised the gun, pressing the barrel to his forehead. "We're taking your payment up front," I said coldly. He glanced between me and the gun, his smile unwavering. "Is that a yes?" I frowned. "I said we're taking your payment up front. Don't you understand?" He interrupted me with a shrug. "Of course, I understand. I'm just waiting for an answer." I clenched my jaw, taking a deep breath. Why had I been assigned to him? He was no use to the organization. His death or life wouldn't change a thing. But questioning assignments wasn't my job. Josh's smile was still there. "So, will you marry me?" he asked again. And I pulled the trigger. "Now." Yes, he was one of the most interesting assignments I've had so far. And yes, it's true that he slipped through my fingers, but I'm going to find him. I've grown tired of him meddling with my work for months and making my tasks harder. When my phone vibrated, I reached for it on the nightstand and looked at the screen. "We'll take the payment up front." I let out a sigh of relief. I glanced over at Rossi, who was dozing in bed. I was glad I wouldn't have to endure another round of him groaning and coming inside me. I had to collect his payment and leave without my uninvited guest disturbing my work. I looked at the bathroom door and sighed. Although I considered taking a shower first, I went to my bag, pulled out my gun, and attached the silencer. "Hey, Rossi," I said as I approached the bed. I pressed the barrel against the center of his furrowed brow as he opened his tired eyes. He swallowed hard. "Rosa?" I pursed my lips. "We're taking your payment up front." His eyes widened. If the gun to his forehead had scared him, learning that it was the organization's weapon was enough to make him soil himself. Wait, he begged. "I didn't do anything wrong, Rosa." "My name's not Rosa, you bastard." "Whatever your name is, slut," he shouted, spitting as he spoke. As soon as I pressed the barrel to his forehead, he returned to being compliant. All right. You shouldn't touch money that isn't yours, Rossi. Maybe in the next life, You'll remember this. That money isn't theirs. I told you every penny they say is ours belongs to the poor. You think you're Robin Hood, huh? I pressed the barrel so hard to his forehead that I heard some cracking of his bones. You, the drug kingpin, I continued, speaking through gritted teeth. You, who make money off people in desperate need. Now you're talking shit about the organization? When he opened his eyes again, there was no trace of fear left in them, only confusion. His voice was barely more than a whisper. Are you talking about their drug kingdom, little girl? I furrowed my brows. Didn't they send you to me because I gave the drug money to the poor people they were using? Didn't they get you into my bed because helping the needy made everyone at that table itch? Didn't they stuff their dirty money back in their pockets every time I fucked you? I swung the gun away and brought it down on his mouth. If you don't shut your mouth, you'll see how fucking actually feels. He grinned, showing his blood-stained teeth. They'll be the ones collecting the real payment soon, he said. A counterattack is coming, little Bella. The war between the rich and the poor is about to start, and you're on the wrong side. Ignoring the gun on his forehead, he lifted his head and moved closer to me. When that time comes, you'll be paying your debt up front, but the interest will be heavier than you expected. His words made me think, not because they frightened me, because a guy like Rossi could only bother me for as long as I pulled the trigger. While the topic was already brought up, I fired the gun and settled the account. Where was I? Right. I got lost in my thoughts, but not because I believed in Rossi or thought that there could be anyone who could stand against the organization. No, I was lost in my thoughts because I had heard something similar before, and it reminded me of the payment I had let slip through my fingers. 3 months ago. You really should have said yes, Adeline. I pulled the trigger once more. My eyes were wide, my brows furrowed to the max. I think the person collecting the payment today is gonna be me, Josh grinned. There was no trace of the warm look in his eyes, and the sincere smile on his lips had been replaced by a sly smirk. From now on, we'll be the ones collecting. Without wasting another second, I swung the handle of my gun into his face, but he caught my wrist just in time and spun me around, coming behind me. His arm was around my neck, still holding my wrist tight, his breath hot against my ear. And you'll pay your debt with interest. Chapter 2. Catch Me If You Can. N.O.W. The bed was already drenched in red. Stefano Rossi, the Robin Hood of the 21st century. By day, he took from the rich and fed the poor, sheltering orphans with the money of tyrants. By night, he ran a drug empire, hosted lap dances with blood-stained cash, and screwed his mistress in hotel rooms while his wife and daughter waited at home. Now, he was just a corpse with a hole in his skull. Kurilish wasn't exactly composed of squeaky-clean businessmen. In fact, I doubted such a term even existed. But at least they didn't pretend to be something they weren't, unlike him. They didn't steal from others, minded their own business, punished those who stole from them, and never amassed wealth from innocent blood. That's why I felt absolutely no guilt about eliminating another Rossi from the face of the earth for them. In fact, I was quite pleased. I glanced toward the bathroom. I'd need to deal with the guards at the door. They were the only ones who had seen me with Rossi. He had been meticulous about keeping his mistress a secret, which made my job easier since I only had 2 more witnesses to eliminate. Still, I really wanted to take a shower before finishing the job, but pushing my luck wasn't wise. After all, my killer was still on my trail, constantly meddling in my missions, spoiling me with last-minute surprises. No man had ever given me such sweet surprises before. I must admit our little flirtations had added a certain spice to my assignments. That's why I skipped the shower, quickly got dressed, and decided to finish things before he came knocking on my door. But first, I had to tease him a bit. Taking care of the guards wasn't going to be difficult. All it would take is playing the role of a helpless, frightened little woman. Honestly, being a woman was usually enough to deceive a man whose brain was mostly muscle. To them, you were just a brief stopover meant for 3 minutes of pleasure. A little scream of help, and they'd burst in, scanning the room for a threat other than me. 10 seconds later, 2 bullets to their heads would be the end of it. So instead of focusing on them, I grabbed my phone and started typing. My dear killer. Do you believe in love at first fight? I do, and I'm eagerly looking forward to our next encounter. P.S. Sorry about the mess. XOXO, runaway bride. I had found his phone number just like that in my contacts after our encounter 3 months ago. Even though my phone was completely secure, protocol required me to destroy it after every mission, but he was my exception. On top of that, he had saved himself in my contacts as your killer. As I said, he was spoiling me. 3 months ago, his muscular arm was squeezing my throat so tightly I could feel my windpipe about to collapse. I couldn't push him away, couldn't move his arm, couldn't breathe. All I could do was struggle and make those strange gasping sounds. But then I remembered who I was. The fact that he had caught me off guard didn't mean I was going to be an easy target. I tightened my neck muscles and tilted my head, moving my jaw out of the way to slip from his grip. Then, with all my strength, I ducked and freed myself from his hold. He swung a punch aimed at my face as soon as I was in front of him. I grabbed his wrist and drove my elbow into his head. He groaned in pain, but before I could capitalize on it, he grabbed me by the waist and lifted me off the ground, intending to slam me against the wall. Just before he could crush me, I used my feet for leverage, flipping over his back and landing behind him. A kick to the back of his knee sent him crashing to the floor. Grabbing the hair I had been passionately pulling moments ago, I slammed his head into the wall. He didn't even take a moment to recover before throwing a wild kick that knocked me to the floor. My red dress tangled around my legs as I tried to get back up. For a brief moment, he also paused to gather himself. When I crawled back to put some distance between us, he was clutching his nose, blood spurting from it. "Did I say something wrong, Adeline?" He grinned, showing his bloodied teeth. Even like this, his smile was devastatingly handsome. He had just tried to kill me, and I didn't know what was wrong with me, but I couldn't stop myself from being aroused. "My name isn't Adeline," I panted. He smiled again, igniting a fire in my core. "I know, sweetheart," he said, standing up. "Funny thing, my name isn't Josh either." I stood too and laughed. "What's your name then?" He pursed his lips. I knew a hitman like him wouldn't reveal his real name to me. "You can just call me your killer." My grin widened. He lunged at me again, fists flying fast and hard. I barely dodged each blow, while he struggled to recover from mine. Muscle-bound men were usually slow and heavy, while petite women were fast and agile. But his fluid fighting style caught me off guard, just as my powerful punches surprised him. It didn't take long for us to adapt to each other's styles, making the fight even more dangerous. When his punch landed on my cheek, sending me to the ground, he didn't hesitate for even a second before driving his foot into my stomach. Despite the pain, I kicked his knee, forcing him to kneel, only for him to grab my ankle and pull me toward him. Before he could straddle me, I wrapped my legs around his waist and locked him in place. It was a good move. It gave me a semblance of control because, in reality, he had the upper hand. He took full advantage, raining punches on my face. Finally, his hands wrapped around my throat, cutting off my air. I was at the end. He had pummeled me, painted my face with blood, and planted sharp pain in my gut. I was sure I had internal bleeding. As much as it hurt my pride, he had beaten me badly. But I wasn't about to give up. As his strong hand squeezed my neck, I clung to his arms. I shifted my waist just enough to throw him off balance, and that small effort was all I needed. I lifted my leg and hooked it around his opposite shoulder. His balance faltered, and with a quick move, I flipped him to the ground, pinning him with my legs. One quick motion and I could snap his arm, or choke him unconscious, or better yet, break his dash. H! A sharp pain rose through my abdomen, stopping me just in time. Lightning bolts exploded in my brain. It felt like lightning bolts were flashing in my head. When I realized the knife had pierced my belly, my legs, which had been wrapped tightly around him, loosened due to the shock and numbness that overtook my body. His arm slipped from my grasp along with the blade. Josh, or whatever his real name was, stumbled to the side, coughing violently. I pressed a hand to my stomach and tried to stand. Dark red suited my crimson dress far too well. I glanced down at my hands, and the sight of the blood snapped me back to reality. I staggered toward the window. The wind from outside whipped my dress around. Josh was already back on his feet by the door. "Where do you think you're running off to, Adeline?" My body, drained of strength, wobbled toward the window until my hip collided with the metal railing. The harsh wind tangled my hair, and my dress fluttered toward him, almost as if it were purposely reaching for my killer. I had to plan this right. Otherwise, it wouldn't be blood loss or a deadly and devilishly handsome assassin that killed me. It would be falling from the 12th floor. I gave him a tired smile. "One of the things I do best, my dear killer, is to run away." With one hand gripping the railing tightly, I threw my head back and, with one last burst of strength, ignoring the searing pain in my stomach, I flipped backward over the railing and let myself fall into the void. "Now." I waited for his reply with a wide smile on my lips. My eyes drifted to the lifeless bodies of the 2 guards lying at my feet, then swept across the room, painted in soft, muted tones. The only splashes of color in the room were the 3 pools of blood and me, standing in my deadly red dress. Finally, the message I had been waiting for arrived, and my smile stretched even wider. "Dear runaway bride, I'm tired of cleaning up after you, and I don't know what I believe, but I can promise you this: if you ever let another man touch you, things will get very, very ugly. Loved, your killer." 3 months ago. Memorizing every inch of the building I was tasked to infiltrate had always been useful. After all, I had a habit of not putting myself in situations I can't escape from. There was no balcony in the room where Josh had tried to kill me, but I knew about the one on the floor below. Remembering that, and managing my descent despite the blood loss, had saved my life. "You think you're Robin Hood, huh?" I pressed the barrel so hard to his forehead that I heard some cracking of his bones. "You, the drug kingpin," I continued, speaking through gritted teeth. "You, who make money off people in desperate need. Now you're talking shit about the organization?" When he opened his eyes again, there was no trace of fear left in them, only confusion. His voice was barely more than a whisper. "Are you talking about their drug kingdom, little girl?" I furrowed my brows. "Didn't they send you to me because I gave the drug money to the poor people they were using? Didn't they get you into my bed because helping the needy made everyone at that table itch? Didn't they stuff their dirty money back in their pockets every time I fucked you?" I swung the gun away and brought it down on his mouth. "If you don't shut your mouth, you'll see how fucking actually feels." He grinned, showing his blood-stained teeth. "They'll be the ones collecting the real payment soon," he said. "A counterattack is coming, little Bella. The war between the rich and the poor is about to start, and you're on the wrong side." Ignoring the gun on his forehead, he lifted his head and moved closer to me. "When that time comes, you'll be paying your debt up front. But the interest will be heavier than you expected." His words made me think. Not because they frightened me, because a guy like Rossi could only bother me for as long as I pulled the trigger. While the topic was already brought up, I fired the gun and settled the account. Where was I? Right. I got lost in my thoughts, but not because I believed in Rossi or thought that there could be anyone who could stand against the organization. No, I was lost in my thoughts because I had heard something similar before, and it reminded me of the payment I had let slip through my fingers. 3 months ago. You really should have said yes, Adeline. I pulled the trigger once more. My eyes were wide, my brows furrowed to the max. "I think the person collecting the payment today is going to be me." Josh grinned. There was no trace of the warm look in his eyes, and the sincere smile on his lips had been replaced by a sly smirk. "From now on, we'll be the ones collecting." Without wasting another second, I swung the handle of my gun into his face, but he caught my wrist just in time and spun me around, coming behind me. His arm was around my neck, still holding my wrist tight, his breath hot against my ear. "And you'll pay your debt with interest." Chapter 2. Catch Me If You Can, N.O.W. The bed was already drenched in red. Stefano Rossi, the Robin Hood of the 21st century. By day he took from the rich and fed the poor, sheltering orphans with the money of tyrants. By night, he ran a drug empire, hosted lap dances with blood-stained cash, and screwed his mistress in hotel rooms while his wife and daughter waited at home. Now he was just a corpse with a hole in his skull. Kurulush wasn't exactly composed of squeaky clean businessmen. In fact, I doubted such a term even existed. But at least they didn't pretend to be something they weren't, unlike him. They didn't steal from others, minded their own business, punished those who stole from them, and never amassed wealth from innocent blood. That's why I felt absolutely no guilt about eliminating another Rossi from the face of the earth for them. In fact, I was quite pleased. I glanced toward the bathroom. I'd need to deal with the guards at the door. They were the only ones who had seen me with Rossi. He had been meticulous about keeping his mistress a secret, which made my job easier since I only had 2 more witnesses to eliminate. Still, I really wanted to take a shower before finishing the job, but pushing my luck wasn't wise. After all, my killer was still on my trail, constantly meddling in my missions, spoiling me with last-minute surprises. No man had ever given me such sweet surprises before. I must admit, our little flirtations had added a certain spice to my assignments. That's why I skipped the shower, quickly got dressed, and decided to finish things before he came knocking on my door. But first I had to tease him a bit. Taking care of the guards wasn't going to be difficult. All it would take is playing the role of a helpless, frightened little woman. Honestly, being a woman was usually enough to deceive a man whose brain was mostly muscle. To them, you were just a brief stopover meant for 3 minutes of pleasure. A little scream of, "Help!" and they'd burst in, scanning the room for a threat other than me. 10 seconds later, 2 bullets to their heads would be the end of it. So instead of focusing on them, I grabbed my phone and started typing. My dear killer, do you believe in love at first fight? I do, and I'm eagerly looking forward to our next encounter. P.S. Sorry about the mess. XOXO Runaway Bride. I had found his phone number just like that in my contacts after our encounter 3 months ago. Even though my phone was completely secure, protocol required me to destroy it after every mission. But he was my exception. On top of that, he had saved himself in my contacts as your killer. As I said, he was spoiling me. 3 months ago, his muscular arm was squeezing my throat so tightly I could feel my windpipe about to collapse. I couldn't push him away, couldn't move his arm, couldn't breathe. All I could do was struggle and make those strange gasping sounds. But then I remembered who I was. The fact that he had caught me off guard didn't mean I was going to be an easy target. I tightened my neck muscles and tilted my head, moving my jaw out of the way to slip from his grip. Then, with all my strength, I ducked and freed myself from his hold. He swung a punch aimed at my face as soon as I was in front of him. I grabbed his wrist and drove my elbow into his head. He groaned in pain, but before I could capitalize on it, he grabbed me by the waist and lifted me off the ground, intending to slam me against the wall. Just before he could crush me, I used my feet for leverage, flipping over his back and landing behind him. A kick to the back of his knee sent him crashing to the floor. Grabbing the hair I'd been passionately pulling moments ago, I slammed his head into the wall. He didn't even take a moment to recover before throwing a wild kick that knocked me to the floor. My red dress tangled around my legs as I tried to get back up. For a brief moment, he also paused to gather himself. When I crawled back to put some distance between us, he was clutching his nose, blood spurting from it. "Did I say something wrong, Adeline?" He grinned, showing his bloodied teeth. Even like this, his smile was devastatingly handsome. He had just tried to kill me, and I didn't know what was wrong with me, but I couldn't stop myself from being aroused. "My name isn't Adeline," I panted. He smiled again, igniting a fire in my core. "I know, sweetheart," he said, standing up. "Funny thing, my name isn't Josh either." I stood too and laughed. "What's your name, then?" He pursed his lips. I knew a hitman like him wouldn't reveal his real name to me. "You can just call me your killer." My grin widened. He lunged at me again, fists flying fast and hard. I barely dodged each blow while he struggled to recover from mine. Muscle-bound men were usually slow and heavy, while petite women were fast and agile. But his fluid fighting style caught me off guard, just as my powerful punches surprised him. It didn't take long for us to adapt to each other's styles, making the fight even more dangerous. When his punch landed on my cheek, sending me to the ground, he didn't hesitate for even a second before driving his foot into my stomach. Despite the pain, I kicked his knee, forcing him to kneel, only for him to grab my ankle and pull me toward him. Before he could straddle me, I wrapped my legs around his waist and locked him in place. It was a good move. It gave me a semblance of control because, in reality, he had the upper hand. He took full advantage, raining punches on my face. Finally, his hands wrapped around my throat, cutting off my air. I was at the end. He had pummeled me, painted my face with blood, and planted sharp pain in my gut. I was sure I had internal bleeding. As much as it hurt my pride, he had beaten me badly. But I wasn't about to give up. As his strong hands squeezed my neck, I clung to his arms. I shifted my waist just enough to throw him off balance, and that small effort was all I needed. I lifted my leg and hooked it around his opposite shoulder. His balance faltered, and with a quick move, I flipped him to the ground, pinning him with my legs. One quick motion and I could snap his arm, or choke him unconscious, or better yet, break his dash. A H! A sharp pain rose through my abdomen, stopping me just in time. Lightning bolts exploded in my brain. It felt like lightning bolts were flashing in my head. When I realized the knife had pierced my belly, my legs, which had been wrapped tightly around him, loosened due to the shock and numbness that overtook my body. His arm slipped from my grasp along with the blade. Josh, or whatever his real name was, stumbled to the side, coughing violently. I pressed a hand to my stomach and tried to stand. Dark red suited my crimson dress far too well. I glanced down at my hands, and the sight of the blood snapped me back to reality. I staggered toward the window. The wind from outside whipped my dress around. Josh was already back on his feet by the door. "Where do you think you're running off to, Adeline?" My body, drained of strength, wobbled toward the window until my hip collided with the metal railing. The harsh wind tangled my hair, and my dress fluttered toward him, almost as if it were purposely reaching for my killer. I had to plan this right. Otherwise, it wouldn't be blood loss or a deadly and devilishly handsome assassin that killed me. It would be falling from the 12th floor. I gave him a tired smile. "One of the things I do best, my dear killer, is to run away." With one hand gripping the railing tightly, I threw my head back and, with one last burst of strength, ignoring the searing pain in my stomach, I flipped backward over the railing and let myself fall into the void. NOW. I waited for his reply with a wide smile on my lips. My eyes drifted to the lifeless bodies of the two guards lying at my feet, then swept across the room, painted in soft, muted tones. The only splashes of color in the room were the 3 pools of blood and me, standing in my deadly red dress. Finally, the message I had been waiting for arrived, and my smile stretched even wider. "Dear runaway bride, I'm tired of cleaning up after you, and I don't know what I believe, but I can promise you this: if you ever let another man touch you, things will get very, very ugly. Love, your killer." 3 months ago, memorizing every inch of the building I was tasked to infiltrate had always been useful. After all, I had a habit of not putting myself in situations I can't escape from. There was no balcony in the room where Josh had tried to kill me, but I knew about the one on the floor below. Remembering that, and managing my descent despite the blood loss, had saved my life. For now, at least. Josh was grinning down at me from above. The curve of his lips was so damn attractive that it was as if he hadn't just tried to kill me, as if I hadn't barely escaped with my life. "I promise you," he said, "the next time I get my hands on you, I'll either take your life or—" I smiled as the taste of blood spread across my mouth. Or, "I'll fuck you until you beg." I pouted. I've never begged anyone for anything in my life. His smile disappeared, replaced by a dark, determined gaze that was as black as the night, and that cold, hard look set a fire ablaze between my thighs. "I promise you, sweetheart, while I'm inside you, I'll make you beg for mercy." I tilted my head with a smirk. "I'll make sure you keep that promise, my dear killer." Chapter 3. Good little girl. I was in the elevator heading to the penthouse of the residence. With the relief of completing my collection, I was on my way to report to Mr. Lockwood. Stefano Rossi had been a particularly significant target for him, something he made crystal clear 3 months ago. After the day I barely escaped death, I spent a week in the hospital, unconscious for most of it. When I finally opened my eyes, I woke to the sound of the heart monitor, feeling like I'd been hit by a truck. The person who woke me up early? None other than Lockwood. He was seated by my hospital bed, his eyes fixed on me. "Welcome back to us, Valerie." He had smiled. Even with the medication clouding my mind, I could tell that smile was far from genuine. He had continued in a cold tone. "We're going to collect from Stefano Rossi." I had propped myself up, wincing. "Are you out of your mind?" I snapped. "I nearly—" He had leaned forward abruptly, making me flinch. "And I'm sure, dear Valerie, that you're eager to make up for your incompetence immediately, and abundantly." I had swallowed hard. There was no arguing with him. Lockwood was at the top of Kurulush, and unlike others who dealt through intermediaries, he took a hands-on approach with his operatives, ensuring they completed their missions and collected what was due. He didn't shy away from getting his hands dirty. He was one of the most dangerous, powerful, and unpredictable men alive. That's why I was on edge when the elevator stopped and the doors slid open. Taking a deep breath, I straightened my posture and forced myself to calm down as I stepped into the penthouse suite. Lockwood was seated in a leather chair in front of the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city. With a glass of whiskey in hand and one leg crossed over the other, the Rolex on his wrist caught the light as I approached. "The payment from Stefano Rossi has been collected in full." I stood behind the chair with my hands clasped, waiting. His back muscles strained against his black shirt. His only acknowledgement of my presence was a slight turn of his head. "Come here, Valerie," he said in a low, measured voice. Despite my nerves, I forced myself to move, reminding myself I wasn't afraid of him. I wasn't someone who scared easily, but there was a fear deep within me that Lockwood awakened every time. When I finally stood in front of him, his ice-blue eyes locked onto mine, freezing me in place. His graying hair had become more pronounced over time, but it did nothing to diminish his charisma. He was likely in his mid-40s but hadn't lost an ounce of his commanding presence. After a sip of whiskey, he smiled. "Any problems?" I fought the urge to swallow nervously. I knew exactly what he meant. He had started doubting my abilities after the incident with Josh Rendell, and he had made it clear he wouldn't tolerate another failure. 3 months ago, in that hospital bed, he had grabbed my throat, leaning in close enough for me to feel his breath against my skin. "Remember, Val, as long as you're useful, you get to breathe," he had told me. That memory still made my blood run cold. So I smiled and shook my head. No problems at all. During the 3 months I spent with Stefano Rossi, I had completed a few other minor tasks. Yet my killer, Josh, had repeatedly sabotaged me, nearly costing me several targets. But in the end, I collected every payment successfully. I knew what failure meant, but I couldn't deny that Josh's little surprises still thrilled me. Of course, Lockwood had no idea about my infatuation with my killer. To him, Josh Rendell was nothing more than a problem. So I quickly answered his question, hiding the fact that I'd been flirting with that very problem just a few hours ago. "Good," he said, standing up and walking toward me with slow, deliberate steps. He stopped in front of me. "Take a few days to rest. You've earned it." I raised an eyebrow. "And after that?" "There will be another collection waiting for you." I nodded. "Of course, Lockwood." He smiled, a smile that would have been charming, even seductive, if it didn't send a chill down my spine. As he walked behind me, his fingers grazed my bare arm, leaving goosebumps in their wake. "I do love seeing you behave," he whispered, his breath brushing against my shoulders. "It was a privilege watching you grow up, Val, and I must say, I'm proud of the young woman you've become." I couldn't stop myself from swallowing hard. A strange pressure settled in my ears, bringing with it a flood of unpleasant, ugly memories, ones I could never escape. "Good little girl." I fought to push those voices out of my head before they consumed me. Lockwood, oblivious to my internal battle, stepped back in front of me. I tried to remind myself that my fear of him was irrational. He saved you, I told myself. He pulled you from an uncertain future, gave you a purpose, and the chance for revenge. No matter how many payments you collect, you'll never repay your debt to him. Lockwood's finger traced my cheek as he stared into my eyes, as if he could see right through me. He leaned in, his gaze intense, filled with something I wished I hadn't recognized: desire, the kind that could burn the world down if unleashed. One day, I have no doubt you'll reach your full potential. His breath warmed my face, and the mixture of fear, tension, and everything else swirling inside me ignited into a burning, undeniable lust. I felt a deep ache, a warmth pooling low in my stomach, but I quickly pulled back. Lockwood was a bad idea, a very bad idea. "I won't disappoint you," I said. Then, with a respectful nod, I backed away toward the door. "As you said, I'll get some rest. Tomorrow, I'll look into the details of my new assignment. You have my word." His face briefly fell, but he didn't press the matter. He simply nodded, allowing me to leave. As soon as I was out of the suite and into the elevator, I exhaled a sigh of relief. When the elevator reached the lobby, I switched to another one to take me to my apartment. I made sure not to make eye contact with anyone. All I wanted was to get to my apartment and sleep. But how could I sleep peacefully in a residence filled with assassins, businessmen, hackers, and other operatives of Kurulush, especially when the man who promised to make me beg for mercy was somewhere out there, waiting for me? Chapter 4. The Stripper. The next day, I was in another private elevator of the residence. This one only worked between the lobby and the basement, reaching the center where Kurulush's assassins organized their dirty work. The doors opened, and though fluorescent lights tried to illuminate it, the center was shrouded in darkness, with deep blue hues dominating the space. I passed through the wide lobby and walked down long corridors, finally entering Jordan's office. It was impossible to find Jordan anywhere other than in front of his screens. Sometimes I thought he probably slept and lived here. It took him a while to realize I had arrived. When he saw me walking toward him, he jumped up from his seat and adjusted his thick-framed glasses. Panicking, he ran his hands through his messy, sweet brown waves as if fixing his appearance with those 2 seconds of effort. He greeted me with a big, somewhat goofy grin. "Hey, Valerie," he chuckled, scratching the back of his neck. I couldn't help but laugh at his manner. When I got closer, looking into his bright green eyes felt like witnessing a massive mountain grin at me, as if it had tripped over its own feet. Jordan was one of the tallest men I knew, and also one of the sweetest people, and he could only hide his feelings for me so much. "Hey, Jordy," I said, patting his arm. With this small gesture, a soft expression appeared in his eyes, as if it might melt away in my hands. Jordy was one of the few people in Kurulush whose hands had never been stained with blood. Not because he hadn't taken anyone's life, but because in this dirty world he somehow managed to stay clean. He was kind-hearted and gentle, so I never really understood why he was part of an organization like this, or how he even ended up here. But I believed in his innocence with all my heart. That's why I couldn't feel any worse for not being able to reciprocate his feelings. But I knew he deserved so much more than my messed-up emotions. "So?" I smiled. "What do you have for me?" He nearly flinched, looking away, then sat back in his chair, saying, "Yes," and handing me a file from the edge of his desk, explaining, "The person we're collecting from is Anthony Malvik." The moment I saw the man's photo in the file, my brows furrowed. "This guy works for Kurulush." Jordan pressed his lips together and shrugged. "Yeah, but we've noticed he's been leaking information for a while," he explained. After glancing behind him and checking the door, he continued in a low voice. "I've heard there's a new group trying to challenge Kurulush." I rolled my eyes. "Yeah, I've heard a few things about this new team too. From now on, we'll be the ones collecting. And you'll pay your debt with interest." I had to completely erase Josh, or whatever his name was, from my mind right now. "All right," I said, trying to collect my thoughts. "So, our new target is a piece of garbage who bit the hand that fed him. How are we going to collect?" He laughed. This mission is pretty straightforward. Just collect the payment up front. Malvik knows too much to be allowed to live another minute." I scrunched my face at his words. Well, I guess someone working for Kurulush could only be so innocent. "Glad to hear that," I said, closing the file and leaning on his desk. "I'm glad my job is going to end with cleaning up. I don't want to deal with men who drool like rabid dogs for a while." Geordie shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "I thought you didn't care about that," he muttered. Then, realizing I was glaring at him, he shrugged casually. "I mean, it seems like you don't mind getting involved with your targets." I crossed my arms in defense. "You think I sleep with my every target? Or let me ask a more serious question. You think I'm fine with sleeping with strangers I'm about to kill?" He shrugged. "Let's just say you're good at playing the role," he dismissed. He had noticed I was offended, but couldn't stop himself from muttering, "So, how many do you think?" I clenched my teeth and rolled my eyes. Before he could finish his question, his voice evaporated. I lifted my hands and shrugged. "I don't know, Geordie," I said with a sarcastic smile. "It's like asking, how many people have you killed? You stop counting at some point." "I bet you've killed more than you've slept with." I turned to the voice behind me and saw Elise, with her light brown waves flowing from her shoulders to her waist, approaching with a cheerful grin and draping her arm over my shoulder. "Because you killed most of them because they tried to touch you," she winked at me. I laughed loudly and hugged her tightly, nearly lifting her off the ground. "I missed you, girl," I squealed. She responded enthusiastically. "Me too," she laughed. When I stepped back, Olivia approached, flicking her platinum hair over her shoulder and giving me a fake smile as she greeted me. Elise said, picking up the file from my desk and grinning mischievously. "Who's next on the collection list?" Jordan quickly jumped in. "Anthony Malvik." Elise nodded thoughtfully. "Yeah, he really pissed off Lockwood." I crossed my arms. "Is that why he's been acting weird lately?" I grumbled. Elise chuckled. "I think it's because of his interest in you." Jordan's face dropped a bit while Olivia rolled her eyes. I shifted uncomfortably in my seat. "I don't want his interest," I said, feeling annoyed. Olivia cut in with a haughty look. "You're so spoiled, Valerie," she said. "You don't want the attention of the top guy in Kurulush?" I scrunched my face. "Would you want the attention of a guy who would probably punish rejection with a death sentence?" She shrugged. "Why would I reject him?" "Simply because you don't want him?" She laughed. "Like none of us have never done that." She dismissed my concerns. I clenched my fists. There's a huge difference between choosing to be with someone you don't want and having no other option, Olivia. In response to my words, there was no empathy in her gaze. Men were simple enemies, frankly, but I was convinced that the worst enemy of a woman could only be another woman. Jordan, uncomfortable being stuck between two women who could start a fire only by their tension, cleared his throat, then hesitantly pointed to the file in Elise's hands and got back to the topic. "I know you're sick of men, but," he said, looking at me, "you'll have to manage tonight, Val." I stared at the ceiling, taking a deep breath. "Who am I tonight?" Jordan pressed his lips together. "Stripper Lori." Jody had prepared everything. I was a new dancer at the club, and no one had minded my presence as I got ready in the dressing room. I had put on a lingerie set that barely covered my skin, unable to hide my body, and had carefully done my makeup. The black latex clung tightly to my body, exposing my provocative curves fully, leaving no room for imagination. I had no trouble reaching the VIP room's door. Malvik was a man the club wanted to impress, and they had chosen to introduce the new, famous, and skilled dancer to him first. The security at the door let me in without delay. As soon as I stepped inside, my eyes quickly found my target, but I had difficulty focusing, because, coming here to hunt, I had unexpectedly found my own personal hunter at the head of my prey. When Josh turned his gaze to me, his lips parted in surprise, tinged with a bit of pleasure. My dear killer wore a smile that could take my life with nothing more than the curve of his lips. Chapter 5. Pleasures paid in advance. Our gazes locked. I didn't know what he was doing here, but he knew exactly why I was here. You came just in time, baby. I did my best not to wince at Malvik's slurred speech. The man caressed the girl's cheek and grinned. This one was a little tired, too, he said, gesturing for me to go over to him. Even though my jaw was like a stone, I didn't hesitate to take on the role and used all my willpower to ignore Josh as I flirtatiously led my steps towards him. However, before I could walk past him, he grabbed my wrist and pulled me quickly, and I found myself in his arms. The deadly look in his eyes shook my soul, seared my skin, and shattered my thoughts as our breaths clashed. "I think I'm going to steal this from you, Malvik," he said, and he grabbed me tightly by the waist. She seems pretty good at her job. It took me a while to turn my gaze from her to Malvik, and I struggled to remember my mission. But Malvik, though upset by this, did not intervene. He only shouted in a gruff voice, "Turn that music up!" My eyes reluctantly found Josh again. He was smiling mischievously at me. "It's so good to see you again, Adeline." He had pronounced that name in such a way that I had ceased to be Valerie. For the sake of this brief moment, I wanted to be that name, that girl, and her Adeline. I released his grip on my waist and stood up, having to cling tightly to the role of stripper Lori. I can't say that it was too difficult, actually, as I placed my hands on his knees, squeezing my breasts, leaning over him. Because God knows, I couldn't keep my hands off him. "The feeling is mutual, Josh," I said, moving my touch from his knees to his groin, exposing my neck to his lips. When his nose caressed my skin, the slightest contact sent a numbing sensation through my groin. "But I wonder, are you here to protect this snitch or something?" His sharp features twisted into a wry smile. "We've learned everything there is to know from him, sweetheart. Don't worry," he said. "I'm here to kill him too." I mused, exaggerating. I straddled his legs, straddling his lap, and snaked my way up my body with my hands. The little moan that escaped my lips made Josh sigh. His whole body was rigid, and the hardness in his groin rubbed between my legs, creating an effect no less than fiery flames against my womanhood. "So," I said, coming to my senses and smiling playfully, "why are you sitting here chatting and getting lap dances with him?" He licked his lips without taking his gaze off my lithe body. When he looked up at me again with a lazy movement, his parted lips triggered me so much that I had to bite my own lip to keep from clinging to them. "I want his last moments to be happy," he finally said. "He's been very useful to us after all." I laughed slyly and made tisk-tisk sounds. "No, Mr. Rendell," I said, continuing to play with him. "You want something else from him?" I wrapped my arm around his neck and ran my fingers through his thick, night-dark hair, tilting his head back roughly. My breasts were dangerously close to his lips, while mine were curling up, savoring this moment of me looking down on him. He couldn't help himself, and he bent his head down and reached for my breasts for a kiss. But I pulled his hair back, stopping him, and leaned in closer, reminding him that I was in control. "I guess it would be a shame for me to kill him before you get what you want," I smiled. A shaky breath escaped from between his teeth. I had driven him crazy. I could feel it in his hardening manhood beneath me. I could see it in the way he fucked me with nothing but his eyes. I could see it in the grip of his fingers that wrapped so tightly around my thighs that they couldn't help but bruise. I could hear it in his increasingly heavy and labored breathing. He wanted to come inside me right then and there. Without loosening my fingers in his hair, I moved my other hand from his neck to his chest, from his chest to his belly, and finally to his groin. Our heat had met at that very point, and our scorching hot pleasure juices had mixed, soaking his pants. I grabbed him firmly, and his lips parted with a tiny smile, a little surprise, and a lot of lust. "Will you look at that?" I said, and with the deepening grip of my hand, I felt every inch of him. "I think you'll be the one begging." The playful tone in my voice contained the kind of intimate vulgarity that only he and she had ever been able to inspire in me. There was no role, no character I was playing. I wasn't Lori the stripper at that moment. Rosa Felinsky was long gone, and I had even forgotten who Valerie was, because at that moment I was just Adeline, and I realized how much Adeline, who was madly lusting after him, was actually me. Adeline wanted every inch of her killer, Josh Rendall. He repeated what I had told him in response to my reference to the promise he had made to me. I've never begged anyone in my life. Although his breath hit my lips in trembling waves, his voice was in such a controlled tone that if my fingers in his hair were the leash I put on him, the words that came out of his lips were the leash he had wrapped around me. I would love to be your firsts, my dear killer. When I rubbed myself against him, a primitive urge moved both of us and our mouths, which opened with desire, reached for one another. Our hot breaths intertwined, our trembling lips were not reaching for the passionate pleasure of kissing, as if we wanted to consume our bodies with our teeth rubbing together. That's why our lips, side by side, had never once intertwined, as if we knew that a simple kiss was incapable of quenching this desire. Both of his hands gripped my hips, and as he pressed me against his manhood, his nails went through my skin. As I said, we were after consuming each other, and he started by tearing my skin apart. He held me so tightly against him that he could have entered me without even taking his pants off. I wasn't sure. The only thing I was sure of was that no matter how hard he pulled me in, it just didn't feel close enough. But that warm hardness of his was causing such aching pains in my groin that I couldn't suppress the moan that escaped my lips. Your boss turned out to be stingy, Josh. I could have killed Malvik with just one look just for ruining this moment. I clenched my jaw and watched the desire inside me slip out of my hands. But no money, no information, just so you know. I pulled back at the man's last words and turned my narrowed eyes on Josh. Wow, I laughed. Now that's interesting. So he still had information to gather from Malvik, you little liar. He pretended not to understand and assumed an innocent expression. What's interesting? That you still need the man I'm about to kill. He rolled his eyes. It's so sweet of you to think I'd let you get your hands on him. Oh, I laughed. How are you going to stop me? As if his presence wasn't enough to distract me, he curled his full lips into a pucker. I'll just go ahead and say you're here to kill him. You really going to ruin all the fun? His only response was a shrug, so I continued. Do you think he'll ever trust you again and cooperate if he finds out that an assassin sent to kill him is dancing on the lap of the man who's supposed to protect him? His jaw was set. He grabbed me by the hips and pulled me closer. The dark look in his eyes told me that things had moved beyond flirty teasing and provocation and into something dangerous. He moved his hand to my stomach and pressed his fingers hard into my skin, right where he stabbed me 3 months ago. I would have said he found my scar like he was the one that put it there, but he really had. I tried to kill you once, Adeline, he snarled. I won't leave my job half done this time. If you touch him, I'll kill you with my bare hands. I said, ignoring both his threatening gaze and dangerous anger. I stroked the hair on his forehead with my fingers. You love making promises you can't keep, don't you, my dear killer? The corner of his nose twitched in anger as he moved his hand from my waist to my neck, but before his deadly fingers could wrap around my throat, I caught his wrist and smiled. No touching the stripper, Mr. Rendall, I warned him, but he pushed my hand that was holding him back like nothing, grabbed my throat tightly, and took my breath away. He grabbed my hips and spoke with the growl of a man wild with the danger of his most primitive desires. I can do whatever I want to you here, Adeline. He shook me hard with his bruising fingers and pulled me towards him. Look around you, he growled. Everything is paid in advance here. I couldn't breathe between his tightening fingers on my throat. With a sideways movement of his wrist, he exposed my neck, my carotid artery, and I felt his hot breath on my skin. Soon his teeth sank into my skin, and any fear, danger, or any other emotion I felt at that moment was replaced by a distorted pleasure. He licked my neck all the way to my ear, and his smoky voice burned into my mind. That includes you. My hand gripping his shirt was helpless, as were my fingers tangled tightly in his hair. My body was tortured with lust as I writhed in his lap. My legs had lost all feeling and felt desperate for even the slightest contact with his manhood, cursing the piece of fabric between us, yet his hardness against my groin caused violent tremors in my abdomen and took my breath away. "Josh," I groaned. I had difficulty swallowing, my dry throat producing muffled moans. I wanted to scream, to take him in right here and surrender myself to him while he taught me the urges I didn't know I had. I couldn't control my trembling body. The only word I knew in my mind at that moment was his name. The only sound that came out of my lips was his name mixed with a high-pitched scream. "Josh!" He straightened up in his seat with a spasm. I could not control my trembling, and I was aware that he was writhing beneath me. I could see him convulsing, but at that moment all I could think of was nothing. Just his name. Just him and the universe burning away in a scorching fire. My skin was turning to ash, slowly, inch by inch. "Josh." His hand, which had been gripping my hips, reached behind me and between my soaked groins, taking me completely into his grasp. "Oh, please!" A giggle that was no different than the seductive tricks of the devil whispering in my ear over my shoulder escaped his lips. His little smile made me so dizzy that I wrapped my arms around his neck, holding him tightly to hold on to reality. He looked into my eyes with a devil's smile on his lips. "I told you I would make you beg." Chapter 6. What I Do Best. Josh, who had seduced me with violent trembling, suddenly pulled back and threw himself into his chair, moving away from me. The devilish curve at the corner of his lips was tightened in triumph. "Why don't you go, Ada?" He smiled. "I won't let you kill Malvik until I get the information I want. Besides, you can think of it as lightening his load. After all, he'll be dead when I'm done with him anyway." I narrowed my eyes. Although his sudden interruption of his earlier passionate touches had left me speechless, he was torturing himself more. But I had no doubt that playing with me was more valuable for him than satisfying himself. "Hey, new girl." My lips curled up slyly at Malvik's address to me. I turned towards him with a seductive toss of my hair and smiled. "Yes, sir?" I blinked. He licked his lips and grinned. I had no doubt that he got excited by watching Josh and my little show. I could see his excitement in the bulge in his pants. He unbuckled his belt, pushed the girl in his arms away from him, and motioned for me to come over as he pulled down his zipper. I jumped from the pain in my calf. Josh's gaze at Malvik was unsettling, and his fingers had left me bruised tonight. Malvik is kind of an attractive guy, I thought to myself. I mean, at least I don't get an urge to gag when I look at him. I took a deep breath as I tried to convince myself, and at least his dirty work was limited to betraying the Kurulush. I kept trying to convince myself, but I shouldn't have to, because with Josh watching my every move, I had little choice but to kill the man. I had to get close to Malvik. I had to take his life by any means necessary. I had to protect the Kurulush's secrets. I had to please my bosses. I had to make sure I didn't disappoint Lockwood. Remember, Val, as long as you're useful, you get to breathe. I couldn't let Lockwood down. There was no room for another mistake in my life, any more than in my career. I turned my gaze to my last mistake and took a deep breath. Josh watched me intently, brow furrowed. I answered without taking my eyes off him. "Of course, sir." As I lowered my leg and tried to get off his lap, he grabbed my wrist and I thought he could kill me with just his eyes. "Don't you dare, Adeline." My smile didn't reach my eyes and made the corner of my mouth twitch, nervous about what I was about to do. I didn't understand why I was so nervous. As Olivia had said, it wasn't something I hadn't done before. "Are you worried that I'll kill him, or are you just jealous?" I asked teasingly, but his jaw clenched so tightly that I could hear his teeth grinding over the loud music. "Don't even think about it." I shrugged. "Promises you can't keep, Josh Rendell." I shook my head. "Promises you can't keep." I released my wrist from his grip and walked slowly toward Malvik. The girl next to him frowned and walked away from him, glaring at me. With sure steps, forgetting all identities I had, I took on Lori. I blocked out everything else as if I had pressed a button in my mind. As I sat down on Malvik's lap with my legs on either side of him, the leather chair swiveled around on its own, revealing Josh to my eyes over his shoulder. I wanted to change positions and escape the piercing gaze of my killer that was fixed on me, but I couldn't take my eyes off him. My hands roaming Malvik's chest, hair and neck actually wanted to reach him. Josh didn't take his eyes off me either, even as the dancer began to wriggle between his legs and kneel in front of him. He followed my every move, not even blinking. He continued to watch me with the same irritability, perhaps even more dangerous irritation, that I had felt when he had left me hanging without satisfying me. Malvik was trying to move his flaming manhood between my legs, clumsily trying to make himself useful. It was obvious that he was dying to lower his hardness, but I couldn't even focus on him. I couldn't take my eyes off my killer. "Yes, girl, that's it. Come on, take me in." I finally got angry and grabbed Malvik's hair as he buried himself in my neck, distracting me with muffled sounds, and pulled his head back. "Shut up and be good." Malvik blinked in realization as he unlocked a whole new kink before my eyes upon my authoritative voice. I thought he would come right there, but he surprised me and looked at me with admiration and nodded. "Yes, ma'am." I buried his face in my neck, thinking that the less I saw of him, the easier it would be. Ignoring him, I looked over his shoulder and saw Josh continuing to watch me with rapid breaths. He was angry, that's for sure. I didn't know for what exactly, but he was shaking with anger, but at the same time he was biting his lips and swallowing hard with a desire that strained his pants. Our eyes were locked as if they were forbidden to look at anything but each other. The dancer climbed onto his lap, but he pulled her aside and looked at me again. His urges overpowered him and he grabbed the girl by the hips, but he couldn't take his piercing gaze off me. The girl was on her knees, caressing his groin, and yet he still watched me with a sigh. I bit my lips. This time, I was the one swallowing hard. The feelings I thought had faded away in my groins were seared and revealed. I reached my hand to Malvik's manhood that had turned into a stone beneath me and followed the path of my wetness that resembled the waters of a river. I let out a shallow, ragged breath through my trembling lips. Maybe for the first time, I was taking a man inside me in order to pursue my own desires. I was shaking with excitement. My head was spinning with pleasure. My scorching skin was soaked with sweat. Strangely enough, at that moment, I was not looking at the man who was filling me, but at the eyes of my killer. When I completely trapped him inside me, my long and deep moan was entangled with the melody of the music. Josh's trembling breath, who witnessed the pleasure I was experiencing, almost reached my skin from the other corner of the room, but this was a loop. My screams of pleasure were taking his breath away, and that was making me shake even more. Then he was sighing deeper. With a pleasure that made my head spin, a shiver that made my blood boil, I began to move my hips. Fuck. Josh was unbuckling his belt in a rush, almost in panic, and his eyes were still on me. His eyes were not leaving me as he roughly grabbed the girl in front of him by the hair. His eyes were not leaving me as he positioned himself in the girl's mouth and took shallow breaths. My killer's eyes were not leaving me as he pushed the girl's head up and down, or as she couldn't fit him in her mouth and made choking sounds. His eyes were not leaving me as he writhed in pleasure with his ragged breaths, and the look in those eyes were making a promise to kill me. I was so out of my mind that I had completely forgotten that I was on a mission. I reluctantly came to my senses and uncorked the small bottle in my bra. No one had even noticed my small movement amidst everything that was happening. I poured the liquid from the bottle onto my finger and put it into Malvik's mouth. He began to suck my finger without even being surprised by what I was doing. Even though I came to my senses, it didn't take long for Josh's gaze to drive me away with the same intoxication. My moans and screams accompanied the music. I was moving Malvik inside me without leaving any place untouched, moving my hips up and down, drawing circles, and writhing on his lap to feel him in every corner inside me. Josh let out growls through his twitching lips, and as beads of sweat poured from his forehead, he pulled the girl's hair to make her go faster. I let out a long, deep moan as if he had whipped me. I sped up. I kept looking at him. I bit my hand to control my tongue that wanted to scream his name. Still, I couldn't suppress my screams, but neither could Josh. "Oh, fuck!" He threw his head back between rapid breaths, and a long, hoarse, raspy moan rose from his throat. I had no idea a man could moan with such a seductive voice, but that primal sound burned me so much that I began to scream, gasp for air, shaking violently. "Yeah, Josh." I had screamed his name with a full-on scream now. Hearing this, Josh sat up in his chair, grabbed the girl's hair even tighter, and sped up, unaware that he was about to choke her with his cock. Finally, he pulled her aside, but he still held her hair as if for support, pressing her head against his groin, but stroking his cock rapidly with his own hand. My hips sped up as he sped up. I screamed as he moaned. I gasped as he shivered. Faster, deeper, and louder, before our breaths could catch up to us, our shivers keeping up with each other. There was only him and me in the room, and we had promised to kill each other, and we continued deeper, as if to see whether it was possible to do so with pleasure. Harder, stronger, tougher, and even more. Rougher with the rage of not being able to touch each other. More, and more. Josh ejaculated onto the floor with shivers. Seeing him so primitive and also that defenseless, watching him tremble and growl, it drained the feeling from my legs, and I shook hard on Malvik, finally reaching orgasm with screams. All my muscles lost their strength, and I felt exhausted there, like I had completely ceased to exist, like I had vanished from the world. I didn't realize my throat was bone dry until I swallowed hard. In fact, I was so busy with my own pleasure that I hadn't even noticed that Malvik had already come inside me. My gaze found Josh again as he tried to catch his breath. When he looked up from the view on the floor and turned his eyes to me, he was out of breath and covered in sweat. He swallowed hard and looked as if he couldn't make sense of what had happened. I got up from Malvik without giving him time to get over his surprise, but I had to give myself time to hold onto the wall and find my balance. The numbness in my legs mixed with the pain in my groin, making it difficult for me to move. I threw myself out the door with difficulty as Malvik collapsed into his chair and grinned widely. As I walked to the locker rooms as fast as I could, I pulled at my underwear and tried to fix it, as much as a small piece of fabric could be fixed. I grabbed the first coat I could find in the locker room and headed for the exit. Although the wind hitting my face when I threw myself out into the street wasn't enough to eliminate the hot traces of the chaotic moment I had just experienced, it made me feel a little better. How do you do that? I jumped. When I turned around, Josh had his hands in his pockets, his head cocked slightly to the side, and was looking at me with a frown, his breathing still ragged. "Who hurt you so much that you can give your body to a random man so carelessly?" I snorted at him and looked away. "You've got to be kidding me," I chuckled. "I was here to do my job. That's all. That's why it's so easy." He shook his head. "You couldn't even do your job," he replied, "and yet you let him fuck you. Was it worth it?" "You tell me, Josh," I sneered harshly. "You had a good time in there. Do you think it was worth it?" "I'm serious. So am I snapped. "A man who just had a blowjob is coming up to me and talking about morality." "There's a difference. 'Cause you're a man?" "I've never been with someone I didn't want to be with before," he said firmly and harshly. "Can you say the same thing, Adeline?" He must have known that I couldn't. I was beginning to shake with the anger of being cornered. I wrapped my coat around myself and clenched my jaw. Of course they had hurt me, but I wasn't going to tell this to an ordinary man and let him judge me, because despite all my desire for him, Josh Rendell was just one of those ordinary men whose real name I didn't even know, although it was obvious that I owed myself an explanation. For example, why I had never been with anyone only because I wanted to, why I preferred a dirty, perverted touch to a pure, loving kiss, or why I was punishing myself by putting myself in a prison made up of the beds of perverted businessmen. I realized that I owed myself these answers, but I did my best to ignore them. My hands, wanting to kill Josh for creating this confusion, dilemma, and hesitation in my mind, began to shake. "Just look back at the people who put you in this situation," he said. Contrary to what I expected, his tone was so compassionate that it put a lump in my throat. I was shocked to witness him showing empathy now, when I had thought moments ago he judged me, saw all the ugliness in me, and was disgusted by me. "You deserve a better life, Adeline, and they definitely don't deserve you." I clenched my jaw. He was trying to confuse me, maybe even to turn me into an informant against the Kurulush like Malvik. He was just trying to use me. I reminded myself that this was a cunning, deceitful, and manipulative killer who knew nothing about me and my life, so I went back to who I was. There was never an Adeline, nor his Adeline. She had never been and never would be. I straightened my stance. "My name's not Adeline," I snapped, "and you talk as if what I did was for nothing, but you're wrong, my dear killer." He closed his eyes and sighed. "Adeline? My name is not Adeline," I said once more. "And while you're wasting your breath here, my collection has already taken its last breath." His eyebrows furrowed, but then his eyes widened in panic. "What did you do?" he asked through his teeth. "What I do best." I wrapped my coat tightly around me and took a few steps back, pursing my lips. I took a man's breath away. Chapter 7. Don't touch me. The heat scorched my skin, but I waited and waited until my skin turned bright red under the water. I ran the loofah over my skin with all my strength. I convinced myself that all the ugliness that infiltrated my skin could be eliminated with the water flowing through my body, and I practically scraped my skin. But the real dirt was in my soul. I was the filthy one, and no force on earth could eradicate that ugliness that had spread like a disease to the deepest corners of my being. I turned off the water and walked through my apartment with the numbness on my naked body, leaving puddles behind me, and entered my bedroom. I stood before my full-length mirror in front of my tall window. I watched the city lights behind the mirror without looking at my reflection. In fact, I avoided it, because I knew that reflection was dirtier than all the filth in this huge city under my feet. It was more ruthless than all the murderers it contained, more vile than all the thieves, more perverted than all the perverts, and more immoral than all the whores. That reflection belonged to someone worthless. I looked at that filth. I didn't believe the sincerity of the tears welling up in her eyes. I lowered my gaze. I touched the teeth marks on her neck. She turned on her side and I ran my fingers over the purple marks on her calves. My hand slid to the nasty nail marks on her hips. Finally, I gave up and lowered my arms. There was no part of her body that wasn't stained with the marks of her ugliness. I ran my fingers over the knife scar in my stomach. I started to tremble. "Who hurt you so much that you can give your body to a random man so carelessly?" I closed my eyes. I wasn't careless. I just accepted it. I accepted the fact that I wasn't worthy of love, and that I had been dirty since the moment I was born, long before the marks on my body. What would such a person know about love, let alone being worthy of love? I humiliated myself and burst into sobs. I broke my own heart and wrapped my own arms around my stomach, trying to console myself. "Who did this to you?" I jumped in fear. When I heard Lockwood's harsh voice, I turned around to find him standing in my doorway, watching me with a concerned look in his eyes. I swallowed hard. I moved my timid hands toward my breasts in a futile attempt to hide my naked body. My eyes were searching my room in panic for an article of clothing to wear when Lockwood walked up to me. The anxious look in his eyes nearly made my knees buckle. I didn't even realize that I needed comfort so badly that I wanted to cry in his arms. He grabbed my arm, and the knot in my throat gave way to the familiar uneasiness Lockwood had always created in me. He spun me around and touched my hips. "Was it Malvik?" he asked. The tension had stiffened my body as his fingers traced the crusted nail marks. "I hope it won't leave scars." I closed my eyes in disappointment. I was a fool to think he was worried about me. Of course, I should have guessed that his only concern was whether his deadliest weapon was still functional. He was only making sure that no damage came to his property. He revealed the bite marks hidden under the dark waves of my hair and ran his fingers over the teeth marks on my neck. "These are some interesting marks, Valerie." His smoky voice vibrated across my skin, chilling my blood. but I can understand." I held my breath as his fingers glided down my back with a feathery touch, my whole body stiffening and captive to the icy breeze. Lockwood, completely unaware of my discomfort, or perhaps completely unconcerned, bent his head over my shoulder, and his breath fanned across my ear. His hand on my neck slid down slowly, his palms lingering on my chest for 1 second too long. Although he was touching me, it was so light that I had difficulty sensing it. It moved through my body like a breeze, making my skin tingle. His palms roamed the full curves of my chest and reached up to my arm, leaving no trace behind, as if he had never intended to touch me. He was walking across my skin like a murderer trying to destroy the evidence behind him. But the feeling he created left a mark more permanent than even the deepest cut. His hardened manhood touched my legs through his pants, and he breathed deeply into my hair. I understand the affects you can have on a man. I was shaking completely. Tension, anxiety, trembling, even outright fear rattled my entire body. And I knew it was irrational. I should have been turned on by his whole existence, but maybe the fragile state I was in just wasn't letting me be my usual self. Lockwood rubbed his thumb across my lips as I struggled to hold back my tears, my throat burning with fire. "After all, I taught you how to be a woman. Please, don't touch me." I didn't even recognize my tearful voice begging him. My words, coming out in a painful, even pitiful groan, settled like a stone in my chest. I've never begged anyone in my life. What had I become? I swallowed hard, trying to stop both my tears and my body shaking with fear. Lockwood was stiff. His hands, which had been roaming my body, had stopped immediately, as if he had even stopped breathing. When he slowly pulled back, his narrowed eyes looked at me with such a thoughtful expression, as if he were looking into my soul behind my eyes, thinking that if he looked hard enough, he could see the reason behind my reaction. But even I couldn't understand what had caused this fragile state of mine. "It's just—" I cleared my throat and tried to explain to him. The last assignments were too much, and I think... While I was trying to find answers that I didn't have, and was completely inept at coming up with an explanation that wouldn't make him angry because I had rejected him, he took a step back, leaned his head toward me, and looked into my eyes. "I'll make sure you don't have to do anything too much for a while then," he said. I thought he'd be angry, but he answered me with such compassion that I couldn't stop the tears falling from my eyes. He caught my one with his finger and smiled at me. "I hope you know how valuable you are to me, Val." I smiled back and relaxed as the chilly feelings I felt around him left my shoulders a little. "Don't worry," he said. "I would never force you to do anything you don't want to do. Remember that." I knew it. I felt terrible for doubting the man who took care of me since I was 13, but I knew it. Josh Rendell was just trying to confuse me, and I was ashamed of myself for helping him achieve his goal, even if only slightly. But he was wrong. What he said wasn't true. Anything that came out of his mouth could only be as true as a word whispered by the devil. Look back at the people who put you in this situation. There I was looking. I was looking into the eyes of the man who had taken care of me since the day I was orphaned, who had raised me to take revenge on the people who had caused me to be orphaned, who had taken me under his wing. I was looking, and all I could see was that he truly cared about me. I nodded. "Thank you, Lockwood." His blue eyes narrowed with a warm smile that I wasn't used to seeing between the hard, sharp lines on his face. "So, to show you how much I appreciate you, would you let me take you out on a date?" My lips parted in surprise. How could one refuse such a nice offer? I laughed. Moreover, I realized that I really didn't want to refuse his offer. I felt as light as a feather as he evaporated all the bad feelings I had. I couldn't help but tease him. "So, are you going to be such a gentleman all night?" He closed one eye and pursed his lips. "I'll do my best." Chapter 8. A Man Like Lockwood. "I don't recall your dress having a slit." I was with Lockwood in the elevator of one of the city's most opulent skyscrapers. I knew I looked breathtaking in the dress he had custom-made for me. Now was not the time to be modest. My black dress was shimmering with tiny star-like glitter, leaving my back completely exposed, and hugging my chest tightly, the fabric hung loosely at my hips and fell to the floor. I had to admit, the fact that Lockwood knew my body well enough to make me a dress that fit perfectly was, well, let's just say it was interesting. I ran my hand over my slit and smiled mischievously at him. "I thought I'd add a little personal touch," I chuckled. Lockwood turned his gaze from the elevator doors to me and raised his eyebrows. He kept his bold gaze on me and reached between my legs without hesitation. His fingers, passing through my slit, found the personal touch I had added to my dress with his hand. His suggestive gaze never left me for a moment. "This is a nice touch." Finally, he raised an eyebrow with a crooked smile, pulled away his hand that found my gun. When he faced towards the elevator door, I fixed the slit I had cut on my own just so I could easily reach my gun. The elevator doors revealed a ballroom that made the word luxury unnecessary, and my lips parted in surprise. Of course, the party I was attending with a man like Lockwood was going to be this fancy. What did I expect? A man like Lockwood was like this. He could manage to make all eyes in the room he stepped into looking at him with expressions of admiration in seconds, causing every conversation to instantly turn into whispers about him, and effortlessly drawing the focus of the room to himself. He made people look at the woman on his arm with disdain and like she was an anomaly. I leaned on a table, put my arms on it, and couldn't help but shift uncomfortably in my place. Was I beautiful? Yes. Did I feel beautiful? Yes. Did I look fancy and luxurious? Yes and yes. Did I have better manners than all the other snobs here? Yes, yes, all of the above. But there must have been something in my aura that somehow they knew or sensed that I didn't belong here. The touch on my waist made me jump. Lockwood must have sensed my nervousness because he smiled warmly and reassured me, stroking my skin with his thumb. "You look breathtaking," he said, his eyes roaming over me. "Jealous looks, that's all." I pursed my lips. To my surprise, he smiled broadly. I'd never seen him act so warm and gentle. He grabbed me by the waist and pulled me close. For the next hour, various people came to our table and engaged in long conversations with Lockwood. Most of them were beggars who wanted to show themselves to him, who wanted to be his friends, but in reality they were just desperate for him to get their problems fixed. A few of them must have even thought I was a partner in Lockwood's reign because they had added me to the target of their fake smiles. Due to boredom and pretentious conversation, I was about to put the gun strapped to my leg in my mouth and pull the trigger when Lockwood turned his attention from the people surrounding us to me. "Excuse me, ladies and gentlemen," he said, and extended his hand to me. "If I don't ask this beautiful lady to dance, there is a very good chance she'll kill me." A small giggle escaped my lips. I took his hand and let him lead me to the stage. In the open area reserved for dancing, he gently swung me by the hand and turned me towards him, and when our chests hit each other, he grabbed my waist. When I lifted my head up, our noses touched and I felt his breath on my lips. "My job has its annoying aspects, unfortunately," he shrugged. "I hope you're not too bored." I pursed my lips. "No way," I laughed. I was only a few seconds away from reaching for my gun. He raised his eyebrows and laughed hoarsely. "What were you gonna do?" I looked away from him and glanced at the people watching us like vultures, then realized that the only person in this room worth looking at was Lockwood, and my eyes found him again. "I'd try to see how many of these wretches I could kill with just one bullet." Lockwood burst out laughing, taking my breath away. I watched him with fascination as our bodies glided to the gentle rhythm of the music. "I'd sit in a corner and watch you kill these people who made my fortune for fun." My eyebrows rose in curiosity. "Wouldn't you be mad?" I asked. "Since you're making your fortune off of them?" "Oh, Valerie," he said, and he moistened his lips. "You'd be surprised to learn how many people in the world are like these wretches who could add to my fortune." His mischievous fingers on my waist slid past my cleavage and found a sensitive spot just below my belly, and my knees went weak. I had to hold on tightly with my hands on his shoulders because of his touch, which made me feel electrified and tense all of a sudden. "But you're one of a kind," he said. I struggled to breathe as his feather-light fingers continued to explore the space between my groin and my abdomen. He whispered behind his breath that blew into my ear. "So, did you like it, my dear Valerie?" I swallowed hard and held him tight. What? Did I like what? Our bodies were pressed together in a familiar closeness. God, I was well aware of how seductive Lockwood was, but I had no idea I could yearn for his touch this much. I had no idea that the longing for his lips on my skin, missing the feeling I get when his breath mixes with mine, imagining him writhing beneath me, dying to entwine his name with my cries, and just missing him would burn me like this. I had no idea that the desire he stirred in me would be so strong that it could make me beg him to teach me how to be a woman again and again, as he did all those years ago. I had no idea that the tension he created in me could be so arousing, or that the fear he put in me could be so exciting. "You're not a little girl anymore, Val," he said, his lips brushing my ear. "It's time you learned that being mine has very different benefits." His hand, which grasped my hips without caring about anyone else in the room, made my head spin. His roughness between my legs caused numbness in my skin and small sparks in my groin. "I could lay the world at your feet." His lips reached my neck and his tongue began to trace deeply across my skin. As if the sight of the people in the room staring at us didn't turn me on even more, I tried to warn him. "Lockwood! People are looking at us." A weak moan escaped my lips. I let out a shaky breath and ran my hand through his hair, ignoring my own warning and pulling him closer, not allowing any distance between our bodies. "Everyone in this room is mine," he said with a growl against my skin. "They all belong to me." His hand found my thigh through my slit and heaved through my underwear, gripping my womanhood with a deep touch, making me moan. "I could ask them to leave right now," he said, his teeth clenched, and he continued to growl against my lips. The dark look in his eyes set my womanhood on fire. "Or I could ask them to cheer as I lay you down right here on the dance floor and fuck you." Our trembling breaths intertwined, and my lips burned to touch his. "Lockwood, how about we formalize you being mine with a grand ceremony, my dear Valerie?" "I already belong to you," I murmured my truths. After he pulled me out of the unknown fate I was given when I was just a child, every day and every second after that I belonged to him. Now I realized that I had already chosen to be his, had already accepted it, and the only man I ever want to belong to is Josh? Chapter 9. Turn Around, Adeline. Yeah? I was tired of asking myself this, but what was Josh doing here? He was just a few feet away, standing by the elevators. What was he doing at a party where the man who had given the death order of him and the woman who had tried to carry out that order were dancing, or frankly making out in front of everyone? "Valerie?" When Lockwood pulled away from me and looked into my eyes in confusion, I realized that he had been trying to get me to finish the sentence I had left unfinished. I swallowed hard and blinked. Over his shoulder, I saw Josh getting into the elevator. I mumbled, but my gaze found Lockwood again, but I couldn't keep my attention on him. I should go to the bathroom and fix my makeup. With a small cough, I cleared my throat and moved away from him, heading straight for the elevator. Josh had already boarded the cabin, and the elevator was already moving up. I waited, following the floor numbers. The elevator stopped on the 27th floor. I kept pushing the call button. I finally got in the elevator and reached the floor where he got off. The doors opened and revealed a long hallway. In the middle of it, Josh was waiting for me with his arms crossed over his chest. I glanced around, thinking I might have fallen into a trap. I couldn't believe he had such an effect on me that I followed him blindly. I got off the elevator with nervous steps and started walking towards him. "Your closeness with your boss is very moving, Adeline." I frowned, but continued walking towards him. Was he after Lockwood? Even if he wasn't, I had to reject any insinuations that could expose him or connect him to me or any illegal business, no matter what. So I shrugged. "He's not my boss," I replied, not moving a muscle on my face. "He's just a regular businessman." Josh laughed with a dangerous charisma that only the devil could possess. "There's nothing regular about Aaron Lockwood, sweetheart." Oh, of course I knew that. I knew it very up close, actually. But of course I had to deny Lockwood's connection to me. After all, he really was my boss and I had to protect him. Josh, on the other hand, couldn't possibly know that my relationship with Lockwood was not only as he said it was, but also much more personal. I shrugged. "I guess you know him better than I do," I laughed. He sneered. "Maybe you don't know him well enough." It made me frown for a second, but I gave him only that much because I wasn't going to let him get into my head or mess with my mind again. I had let his few words at the strip club mess me up that night, but I wasn't going to make that mistake again. I was enough for myself, and when I wasn't, Lockwood would always be there for me, because he had always been there. "What are you doing here, Josh?" I asked, rolling my eyes. "I'm here to get my life back on track, Adeline, after you messed it up by killing Malvik." I laughed at that and took another step toward him, closing the distance between us. "So you're still not over that, huh?" I continued to laugh, and I saw that Josh really did have a lot of hope in that guy, because he was clenching his jaw in anger and breathing through his nose in front of me. "You have no idea how important that information was," he said furiously, "especially to me." I narrowed my eyes. "Personal," I suggested. "So, Josh Rendell, what personal problem does a hitman like you have with a two-faced businessman?" He shook his head. "That part is none of your business." I shrugged. "You're right," I said, and moved closer to him, running my fingers along the collar of his jacket. "In any case, I enjoyed fucking him to death right in front of you." He grabbed me by the throat and slammed me against the wall. When my eyes, which had darkened for a moment, recovered, he was furious. But without taking him seriously at all, I spoke with a naughty smile. "That's it, dear killer. Teach me to behave." "What kind of a slut are you?" I could barely speak as he didn't even let me breathe. "You weren't complaining when you were coming while looking into my eyes, honey." I saw his nose wrinkling in disgust. Then he shook me by the throat once more and then pulled back. I was overcome with coughs. While Josh was trying to calm down with deep breaths in front of me, I finally straightened my posture and pulled myself together. His eyes, which were examining me from head to toe, were looking at me in detail as if they were looking at me for the first time. I saw the desire I had created there without any effort, and I licked my lips and took a step towards him. "Why can't you stay away from me, Josh?" He took a nervous step back and frowned. "What are you talking about?" He snapped at me. I pursed my lips and continued to push him. "Everywhere I look, you're there." My provocative voice made him bite his lip. "You appear before me at every corner, and each time you can't keep your hands off me." He took another step back. It was all a coincidence. When his back hit the wall, his eyes looking down at me were so conflicted that I was sure he was torn between stripping me naked and slitting my throat. "Or maybe," I continued, "you just can't stay away from me." I eradicated the distance between us as I ran my hand across his chest, my lips brushing over his, and I moved my other hand to his belt. "Maybe you just can't get me out of your head." He took a deep breath. His hand gave in and reached for my waist. The moment he touched my bare skin, he electrified it with a dizzying intoxication. If only he knew what feelings he aroused with just the slightest touch. "You might be right, Adeline," he murmured against my lips. He grabbed my hips from the bottom. His other hand went up my belly and then squeezed my breast. I ran my fingers through his hair. I ran my tongue from his neck to his chin and licked his Adam's apple. I got drunk on the incredible taste of his skin. My teeth roamed and roamed his neck and reached his ear. My breath made him tremble. His grip on me grew tighter. I heard the sly devil inside me start to giggle. But Josh suddenly went still under my hands, leaving me hanging. I pulled back hesitantly, looked into his eyes, and put on an innocent expression. "Don't you want me?" I asked. Josh's deep sigh was actually enough of an answer for me, but he didn't stop there, and he lifted me up by the calves and pushed me against the opposite wall. He looked into my eyes and blew his fiery breath on my lips. "Ah." He sighed as he squeezed my hips. "I want to fuck you all night, Adeline." I swallowed hard. He was still in the mood, which was good news for me, but Josh had a wicked way of making me forget not only my mission, but where I was or what I was, hell, even who I was, making me forget my mission and wanting to be Adeline once again. But he suddenly reached between my legs, grabbed my gun, and put it under my chin. "But I know you'll kill me the moment I come inside you." My lips twitched as he pulled his head back and looked into my eyes, smiling. "You caught me," I said. He pushed my chin up with the barrel. What's gonna happen now?" I asked. I couldn't quite explain why I was shaking. It would make perfect sense if it was because of the fear or nervousness. But I had known for a long time that there was nothing sensible between Josh and me. Maybe it was because I was so overwhelmed by the way he could hold me up with one arm. Maybe I was just shaking because he was replacing the fear of death that was in my blood with a dark fantasy. Whatever the reason, all logic had abandoned us at that moment, and he acted accordingly, pressing the barrel of the gun against my neck and bringing the cold metal down between my breasts, then down to my stomach, and then between my legs. "What would you like to happen, sweet Adeline?" When he pressed the barrel into the space between my legs, I opened my eyes wide and let out a ragged breath. I grabbed his hair with my hands on his shoulders and managed to suppress the groan rising from my throat. He lowered me onto one leg as he kneeled down and lifted my other leg onto his shoulder. I was well aware that he was still holding the gun. He placed his head between my legs through my slit. The warmth of his breath reached every inch of my womanhood. He would make me surrender my soul there before he even touched me. I was waiting for the scorching contact of his lips after his hot breath, but the first thing I felt was the coldness of the gun. Josh, who ran the barrel over my skin, lifted his head up and watched my reaction with a devilish smile. But the only reaction I could give was the shaky breath that spilled from my lips, which were parted in surprise. He pressed the barrel of the gun into me. I prepared myself for it to hurt. However, my body was burning with such desire in a twisted and sickly way that my legs were soaked below. The barrel had no trouble reaching inside me through the wetness, and it caused a pressure that was about to drive me crazy. Josh's lips found my clitoris, and the pleasure of it all brought tears to my eyes. Finally, I couldn't hold it in anymore, and my scream echoed throughout the hallway. "Shh," Josh warned me between my legs as he pushed the barrel deeper, yet very carefully inside me and drove me crazy with his playful voice. "I know it's going to be hard, but you have to be quiet, Adeline." At that moment, I was glad that I had chosen a low-caliber gun to take with me, and also glad that the barrel that was inside me didn't have a sight. I tried to stay quiet while Josh worked wonders by moving his tongue between my folds. The barrel of the gun continued to slide inside me, making me writhe, while Josh's tongue, licking my clitoris as if it wanted to own it, continued to leave me breathless with a pleasure that blinded my eyes. Finally, I didn't even care about his warnings and screamed. If people came out of every room in that hallway, I would have told them to take a seat and watch me as this man kills me with pleasure. They could listen to my screams and even satisfy themselves while they're at it, but no amount of force could get Josh out between my legs. I pulled his hair and pressed him closer to me. He gripped me tighter with his nails that he dug into my calf on his shoulder. Even though the gun was low caliber, the explosions it created inside me were equivalent to a cannonball. Ah! I couldn't even think of breathing as I moaned in ecstasy of pleasure. All I could do were simple actions: pulling Josh's hair, screaming Josh's name, enjoying Josh's tongue between my lips. "Josh!" I was shaken by a shrill scream. The safety on the gun was on, and I knew it wouldn't go off. But I had no idea a gun with the safety on had the potential to kill me like this. He kept moving the gun as he held me by the hips and pressed me against his lips. He was being extremely slow and careful, and there was no point in moving the gun too much. The pressure it was creating in my vagina was more than enough. Josh's expert use of his tongue didn't even need any extra tools. "Josh!" His tongue roaming my soaked womanhood shook me violently, and my orgasmic body lost all its strength. I could barely stand even though I was holding onto his shoulders. Josh carefully pulled the gun out of me as he licked me from head to toe one last time, and that killed me. I collapsed there in spasms, but he caught me just in time and held me upright by wrapping his arms around my waist. When I turned my languid eyes to him, there was a need in his gaze that only someone who had been thirsty for a long time could have. "Oh, Adeline." He pressed his rigid manhood between my legs through his pants and me against the wall. "I'm going to regret this." He breathed in my neck with a shaky breath. His breaths became faster and faster. His grip on my waist tightened as if he were having an internal conflict. Finally, he threw the gun in his hand in anger, and his frightening eyes found me. "Turn around!" I still couldn't catch my breath. I swallowed hard and couldn't suppress my smile. "What?" He threw his head back with frustration. "For God's sake, for once do as you're told and—" He let out a sharp breath, and without waiting for me to obey him, he quickly turned me around and pressed my face against the wall. Turn. Around. Adeline. Chapter 10. Kneel, Valerie. Josh was behind me, rushing to lift my skirt, desperate to reveal my hips. His breath on the back of my neck was searing my loins with desire, as if he hadn't made me scream with orgasm only seconds ago. I was panting just like him when he exposed my bare hips, his one arm around me squeezing my chest, the other hastily unbuckling his belt. I was insatiably hungry to help him, bending my waist and leaving my hips completely at his mercy. My throat was dry, my skin was burning, my head was spinning, my muscles were numb, and I was dying to take him inside me, to be his Adeline right there, to announce to the entire skyscraper with my moans and screams that I was his Adeline. Lockwood, the blood that had been boiling in my veins only a second ago, froze at the sight of him. He was staring at me from the door of the fire escape, by the elevator. He was killing me with his gaze, stabbing me, slitting my throat, shooting my heart, setting me on fire, flaying my skin, strangling me with his bare hands, and even trying to find a way to do all of them at the same time. His eyes suddenly moved away from me and to a point further down the hall as I heard some man's shout. "There they are!" Josh startled behind me, let go of my skirt and looked that way. I also looked in the direction of the sound with my breath caught in my throat. I saw 3 guns pointed at us. "Get down!" I heard Lockwood shout, and at the same time Josh grabbed me by the waist, lifting me off my feet. As the gunfire filled the hallway, Josh and I collapsed to the ground and took cover. The men Lockwood had opened fire on were firing back at him before I had time to catch my breath. I clung to Josh's arms as the bullets whizzed past us. We had taken cover in a narrow doorway, and I was on the verge of going mad, unable to do anything. The bullets that were hitting the walls of the hallway were throwing plaster everywhere, and I was trapped. Lockwood was looking at me from behind the wall with a dangerous gaze. As the plaster from the wall flew between us, I could see in his expression that he was still killing me in various ways. So I was quite surprised when he let out a long curse and shouted at me, "Run to me!" Despite the heat of the moment, the dangerous confrontation, and the fact that death was only inches away from me, Lockwood's words brought a hopeful smile to my lips. I instantly moved from where I was, from Josh's lap, and waited for an opportunity to run to him through the bullets. I locked eyes with Josh. It was harder than I had expected to tear my eyes away from his eyes, which were staring at me with a look of astonishment. I reached for the knife hidden in the sole of my shoe and dropped it on his lap. I wasn't sure why I had given him a knife to save himself. I didn't know why I cared. It shouldn't have even occurred to me. "I'm sorry, dear killer," I said. "You're on your own." His face was completely emotionless. He didn't respond to the knife I left in his lap. Not a muscle moved in his face. "Now!" As Lockwood shouted, I jumped up from where I was and ran, trusting him with a blind faith without checking the situation in any way. Lockwood was continuing to fire at the attackers, and there were 2 of them left now. I managed to throw myself next to Lockwood thanks to the attackers taking cover from the flying bullets. Lockwood, who pulled himself out of the line of fire with me, grabbed my waist and dragged me to the fire escape. The last thing I heard as the door closed behind us was a series of bangs and shouts. Before I could comprehend what had happened, I found myself back in the ballroom. We must have taken the elevator from the lower floors because when I finally pulled myself together, the doors opened and revealed the hall to me. No one was even aware of the conflict that had been going on upstairs. Lockwood pulled me and dragged me down the elevator a little. I caught my breath as he ordered the few muscle masses that came to him to go upstairs. Maybe my fear was unnecessary, because maybe Josh was already dead. I had to close my eyes, forget about that man, and focus on somehow explaining myself to Lockwood and making him forgive me. When we reached a table near the dance floor, I was struggling to stand. I had been in a gunfight before, but none had shaken me up like this. I was propping myself up on the table with my elbows, but I still had trouble standing. I put my head in my hands and took deep breaths to calm myself. I tried to muster up my courage before looking at him. Lockwood? I swallowed hard and didn't dare say anything more. I was afraid to look him in the eye. The funny thing was, I realized I had never been this scared around Josh, who was satisfying me with a loaded gun only moments ago, but that couldn't even come close to how terrified I was under Lockwood's shadow that made me tremble like a thin leaf. Lockwood confirmed my fears and grabbed me by the throat and slammed me into the table I was leaning against. I thought the impact had split my back in two. It might not have been heard over the sound of plates and dishes flying around, but he might have crushed my bones. For God's sake, he might have taken my life right there before I even realized it. Not even a second had passed since the noise that had erupted, and all conversation had ceased along with the sound of music. The entire hall was silent, except for the small sounds I made as I choked. I couldn't even tell him to stop. He wasn't allowing my lungs to have any air. Even though I tried to push him away with a pitiful effort, to struggle under his grip and fight against him, his strong muscles wouldn't allow it, and I felt like I would break my neck if I resisted any longer. "The party's over," he practically roared without taking his eyes off me for even a second, and the people in the hall started to move towards the exit at the same time. Not a single one of them dared to ask what was going on or to help me, and they left me to my fate. Lockwood finally freed me as my vision was about to be swallowed by darkness, and I began to cough with a force that almost tore my lungs out. I was bent over the table, barely able to stand. "What are you doing?" I asked, trembling. I wanted to say more, but I couldn't catch my breath. Lockwood had completely suppressed his earlier anger, hiding it behind a perfectly calm expression. But I could see that the fire behind his eyes was still there. "Would you rather they stayed here and cheered?" The pain that burned my throat brought tears to my eyes as I swallowed. I was shaking so much with fear that I could hear the few remaining forks on the table rattling. I hadn't had any trouble remembering what he had said while we were dancing, but now I was sure he was talking about the crowd cheering while he killed me. I struggled to get back on my feet and practically begged him. "Lockwood, you misunderstood me completely," I said. "I was only trying to do my job." "I didn't know you enjoyed your missions so much, Valerie," he said. And when he started to walk towards me, I practically jumped and backed away. Pathetic. That was the only word that could describe me now. "No," I protested, panicking. "Look, I saw him here and thought he might be here to kill one of the guests. Maybe even you. I just wanted to finish what I started. I was going to kill him." Lockwood narrowed his eyes. I looked away cowardly. "It didn't look like it." My lips twitched as I smiled hesitantly. "That's part of my job, isn't it?" He pursed his lips. I thought I convinced him. I thought he believed me because I was telling the truth. Josh might have given me a good time, but of course I was going to kill him afterwards. Only there was a gunfight and I missed my chance well, for God's sake, I'm human, and I can be distracted too. Lockwood continued to advance on me. I couldn't help but step back and try to keep some distance between us. "And you're very good at your job, Val," he said. "And I see you're more than ready to get back to work." I swallowed hard. I had dug my own grave. The peace I had gained from not having to endure the disgusting provocations of disgusting men was short-lived. Lockwood had shown me that he truly cared about me by respecting my wishes, but after the show I had put on with Josh, he wouldn't care about my wishes at all. "That is, of course," he continued, and a sly look crossed his eyes. "If Josh isn't an exception for you." I swallowed hard. He had me cornered. It was obvious that I had a soft spot for Josh, but I couldn't let him find out, or it would be the end for me. He shouldn't think I had a weak spot. I didn't want to throw away all the hard work he had put on me over the years, and the thought of disappointing him was worse than a nightmare. "Do you like it when he touches you, Valerie?" I practically jumped at his question. I started to shake my head in panic, but he kept coming at me. "Is that why you didn't kill him?" he asked, my back hitting something made of iron. When I looked up for a moment, I saw that I had hit the spotlight. Or dash. "No." He turned his head to the side in slight surprise at my harsh answer. His eyes were still deadly, his shadow over me still dangerous and frightening, but I needed him to believe me. "You gave me an order, Lockwood," I continued. "Infiltrate Josh Rendell's life, find out what he is and knows, then kill him. That's all I was doing, and I'm ashamed that I failed, but that doesn't mean I'm giving up." Although the suspicious look in his eyes didn't disappear, he didn't say anything. He didn't respond, just stared at me. "He's only a collection, and I was only following your orders." He surprised me, and a small smile appeared on his lips. There was also a look of intrigue in his eyes. "I know you won't disobey me." I breathed a sigh of relief and returned his smile, albeit unnervingly. "Of course, Lockwood." I jumped when he took a step toward me. My back was pressed against the lighting truss behind me, trapped, and I was terrified of what was going through his mind right now. I was terrified of what was going to happen, what could happen, what he might do. "Then get on your knees." I swallowed hard. My heart stopped beating. My breath caught. For a moment, I thought I might have misunderstood him. What?" He leaned over me, and his eyes took on the darkness of a man's most terrifying instincts. "Kneel, Valerie." Chapter 11. The Belt. "Kneel, Valerie." I began to tremble completely. I looked into his eyes, begging for mercy, but it was cold. He was devoid of any emotion, only someone who wanted to hold me in his grasp, and he was definitely not someone to beg for mercy. Lockwood Dash. "You know I don't like to repeat myself, Val." Oh, I knew. That's why I nodded, and without further aggravating him, without interrupting him, I took a deep breath and managed to get my shaking knees to work, and I sank to the ground. I kept my head down, avoiding looking at his erection at eye level. Looking at the polish of his dazzling shoes seemed less dangerous than looking at his manhood. But Lockwood began to unbuckle his belt with slow movements. He took the black leather in his hand and waited in front of me. I never once looked up, but instead he caught my chin and lifted my head. His expressionless eyes met mine. "Are you rusty, Val?" Even as he raised an eyebrow, his expression was extremely cold. There was no emotion, only the determination of someone who knew what he wanted and the confidence of someone who could get anything he wanted. "Do I have to explain to you what to do?" I swallowed hard between his fingers, which gripped my chin tightly. He narrowed his eyes. "You used to know exactly what to do." I wanted to avoid looking into his eyes, but he still forced me to look at him. I swallowed hard as memories from the past came back to me. Maybe a year after he saved me, he decided to train me. I had gone through many trainings, such as weapons training, strategic training, close combat, long-range combat, even human psychology and manipulation, but none of them were like the training Lockwood gave me. None of them taught me how to use my womanhood to take a man in the palm of my hand. When he let go of my chin, I struggled to move my tense muscles. Finally, with my trembling hands, I managed to unbutton his button and lower his zipper. I had had more experience with men than I was ashamed to admit. I had made love to various men, in various places, and with various fantasies. Perhaps there was nothing I hadn't experienced, but here I was. I had become a trembling virgin in front of Aaron Lockwood. When I took his manhood in my hand, I turned my hesitant gaze into his eyes. I parted my lips. He stroked my hair. I took him into my mouth. He smiled a little. "Good job, Valerie." I moved my head back and forth with hesitation. When Lockwood pulled my hair into a ponytail, I felt his belt around my neck. At that very moment, he pulled me to him by the neck with his belt. I thought my lips were torn. I was sure he had torn my throat. His manhood, which filled my mouth completely and even more, made it difficult for me to breathe. I clung to his legs with a struggle accompanied by the sounds of my suffocation. I tried to push him away. Despite my hands hitting his waist, he did not move in the slightest, continuing to hold me against him with the belt he had wrapped around my neck. When he finally released me, I pulled away from him with coughs. I was almost prostrate on the ground, desperately trying to breathe. "You've learned a lot from me over the years, Val," Lockwood said, still looking down at me, taking off his tie. My teary eyes could barely see him, but it was impossible not to notice the dangerous look in his eyes. "But tonight, I'm going to teach you this." He wrapped his tie around my neck, tightened it like a leash, and immediately took my breath away, leaning over me. "I still have so much more to teach you." The tie, there was no point in denying it anymore, the leash he put on my neck scratching my skin, but he still practically dragged me to the bar table, throwing me violently, making me hit my stomach on the table. When the sound of the stools I had knocked over stopped, the sound of his voice behind me sent shivers down my spine. "Lay down." But at that moment I was incapable of doing anything. My will was entirely his, my mind entirely his, and there was nothing on earth I could do on my own. Only if Lockwood let me breathe, I could. Only if he wanted me to talk, I would. As long as he was with me, I was alive. The moment he was gone, I would crumble into dust. He grabbed my hair and yanked my head back and roared behind me, "Lay down!" As he threw me on the table, I lay face down on the table as he said. At the same time, he pulled the tie tight and grabbed a knife and pinned it to the table. The knife stuck into the table and pinned me there. With the sound of my skirt being torn, I was now completely at his mercy. I could hear the clack of his belt buckle behind me, not sure what to do. My heart was pounding in my chest with the anxiety, adrenaline, and twisted excitement of being completely defenseless. In that panic, he instinctively grabbed my hands that I had brought back and pushed them. Finally, he took a sharp breath and pulled down my panties. Before I could understand what was happening, he had my hands clasped above my head. After feeling the piece of fabric on my wrists, I could no longer move my hands. When I looked up, I saw that he had tied my hands to the beer tap. Using my panties, he leaned over me and whispered, "I won't tell you to be good again." When he got behind me, his hands roamed my bare legs for a while. He was touching my legs, but it was making my whole body shiver. It was making me shiver at the bar table. Not being able to see him, not knowing what he was going to do to me, was mixing fear and desire in my blood. I felt his breath when he grabbed my hips with both hands. His warm breath between my legs was followed by his lips finding my skin. A harsh breath left my lips as well. I was about to go crazy as his tongue explored my curves. I was writhing with pleasure under the control he had established over me. He had tightened my collar with the tie around my neck and had cuffed my wrists with the panties he had secured my hands. He had laid my will on the ground on the table where I was lying face down, and I wasn't about to complain. "Aaron!" I called out his name with a scream that escaped my lips. His tongue stopped immediately on my clitoris. I guessed he had stood up behind me. I cowered in fear, waiting for his next move, even hesitating to breathe. "I didn't tell you you could make a sound." I heard the sound of his belt for only a second before it reached my hips. My scream echoed throughout the ballroom. Immediately, his fingers reached between my legs and to my soaked lips and found their way inside me. "You will not moan without my permission, Valerie." I tried to say a weak "uh-huh" through my lips, but I couldn't suppress the muffled groan that followed immediately. The hard surface of the belt slapped against my hips. My whole body went rigid as I screamed. Tears welled up in my eyes, and a searing heat settled on my skin. I wouldn't have thought it strange if he had said that there were embers crawling up my hips. Even though I held on to the beer tap in pain, the pleasure juices between my legs continued to flow without obeying reason, my groin going numb and my belly writhing with desire. "Aaron, please." I had to swallow hard. I couldn't even form proper sentences. I wasn't even sure what I meant. Was I trying to tell him to stop? Or was I just asking him to come inside me? Did I want more? I wasn't sure of anything. "There is always a punishment for breaking my word, my love," he said, and as his belt moved across my skin, his fingers reached my vagina. He moved inside me. He swam in the wetness. He caressed my lips. I screamed. He punished me. He made me writhe. I screamed. He might have torn my hips to pieces. I didn't know, and I didn't care. I was lying there on the table, unable to even move. Every time I thought I was going to orgasm, he would punish me with the belt. He was training me with rewards and punishments, but I just couldn't learn my lesson. He paused behind me for a while, and from the rustling sounds I heard, I realized he had taken his clothes off. When his naked body was pressed against my hips, he leaned over me and his lips reached my ear. "You are under my rule, Valerie. Don't ever forget that." I felt the head of his cock, and soon he was inside me all at once and completely. I was sure the whole hotel heard my scream. I suddenly fell silent and shrank in fear at the thought of the belt, yet the punishment I was expecting never came. My muscles had lost all their strength, and after my scream, faint and broken sounds spilled from my lips. They were nothing but incoherent, muffled mutterings, like those of an addict too weak to speak. Lockwood pulled back and filled me up to every inch again. He grabbed my hair and pulled my head to him, his fingers gripping my chin tightly. "Did you hear me?" Another weak moan escaped my lips. "You're my employee," he said, slamming his hips hard against mine, and this time he managed to squeeze a loud scream from my lips. "You're my assassin. You're at my command." With each sentence, he pushed himself hard into me. The sounds as our bodies collided together resembled the rhythm of a fiery music in the hall. I completed the melody with my screams. He played the bass with his growly voice and sped up the rhythm. He intensified the song. It was as if he was trying to pin me to the table. He was trying to tear apart the wood beneath me, and in the meantime, me. I was torn between fear, pain, desire, and pleasure. "Mine," he said as he moved in and out of me. He didn't slow down as he slapped my hips violently, making me moan as violently. "You're my woman. You're mine. Only mine." Aaron, He grabbed my hair with both hands and pulled as if he wanted to break my neck, pushing his cock all the way in with every word that came out of his lips. "You belong to me, Aaron." He leaned over me and brought his lips to my ear, picking up speed and moving in and out at a pace that was hard to follow without allowing me to catch my breath. "If you ever—" He shivered against me. Without slowing down for a moment, his harsh voice vibrated through me like his hard cock. "Ever forget who your owner is." He became furious, out of breath. The sound of him slapping against my hips was loud enough to drown out my moans. "If you ever forget who you are and who you belong to?" I was writhing. I thought I was dying. I wasn't sure if I was in pain or experiencing the most intense orgasm I'd ever experienced, but I was screaming and crying and begging for mercy. I was begging him, but I wasn't sure why. To make him go faster? Stop? Harder? Please? Keep going? "If you ever let that man touch you again?" "Oh, Aaron, please." I didn't know what I was saying or why I was saying it. I didn't know anything. I just squirmed. "I'll fuck you to death, sweetheart." Dear Killer Part 1, A Deadly Waltz of Love and Betrayal, will continue.